Greetings, swingers, and welcome to the 10th episode of the Electro Swing podcast. I can't believe we're at 10 episodes already. Brought to you by Electro Swing Thing and hosted by me, Offbeat. This week, I'm joined by USA-based producer and DJ Atom Smith. In this episode, Atom gives us a glimpse into his creative process and how he achieves his signature sound, as well as his extensive collaborations, which include former guest Alanna Lyes, West Coast rapper Burkey, and burlesque impresario Miss Emmma, with 3 M's. All of this and much, much more in the 10th episode of the Electro Swing podcast. Atom Smith, welcome to the Electro Swing podcast.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here.
Nice one, man. Thank you very much. For people listening or watching who aren't familiar with you or your work already, can you just give us a brief description of who you are and describe your music in your own words, please?
Sure. Let's see. I'm an American electro swing producer. There aren't many of us, but there are a few. I think what differentiates me from some of the other guys is that I'm really into big, bright, tight horn lines, and I tend to keep it funky and housey with big horns, and occasionally take it into like a hip hop kind of a direction too.
I feel the rhythm pumping everywhere I go, covered in gasoline and ready to explode. I got the fire and I'll put it to the test. My feet are shaking, my limbs are vibrating, I'm so restless. I'm so restless.
Bumping everywhere that I go.
What is your background prior to Electro Swing? Because you seem like a very musical guy. I'm sure you didn't just start with Electro Swing. What was the journey before you got there?
I'm old as hell too, so I've been at it for a while. I started in the 90s actually with starting with electronic music for sure, but more of a at that time kind of a Depeche Mode, even like an industrial dance kind of a sound, and then that evolved into more of like what was called electronica, like bands like Garbage and Sneaker Pimps and stuff like that. All those like song oriented, but still very electronic, as opposed to like just full on dance music, EDM, that kind of thing. And then that evolved. I wound up working with a band called The Mutator, and that's when I started working with multiple drummers and percussionists and horn. We had a horn section, and that kind of evolved into, we wound up actually having the same manager as the Grateful Dead. You can imagine that. So like we started doing music festivals, and I started working with different jam bands, and so it was all about combining electronics and electronic music with real players. I worked with Zakir Hussain. I worked with Les Claypool. I worked with a bunch of the guys from the Dead, all people who put a very high value on your skills as a musician. And I had to kind of like hold my own and battle my way on stage with these guys as the electronic guy with the behind the computer. And this kind of led naturally into eventually Mutator went down in flames. And when it did, my main songwriting partner Buck Down and myself became the Gentlemen Callers, and we met Nick of Freshly Squeezed at Glastonbury, and we struck up with some shit and started sending him music, and he started putting it out.
So your first EP as Atom Smith came out in 2018, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Can you talk us through a little bit about your release history and the EPs and the albums that you've put out?
Sure. So let's see. So that first one, in those days, Nick was doing something. Shoot, I think they were called like the Blue series. At any rate, I think there's been different approaches of releasing through Spotify. These days we do more singles, but in those days we were releasing like 4 songs at a time. And I think the first things that I said Nick that he was like, "Oh yeah, I'd put that out," was a couple of things I did with Burkey, the West Coast rapper that I mentioned is. So that came out in I think 2018, and it was doing pretty well. I realized that what the sound was really missing was some really powerful horns, and that's when I started working with Elliot, who I knew from the Mutator days, who does his own Pandemonium big band. He's a proper LA big band guy, and that's his world, and that's what he likes to do. And I was like, "Hey, bro, remember me? Want to do some electronic music?" And being a younger guy and a pretty hip fellow, like he was on board with that. And that I think is how the bass age big band concept came together. Like, oh, this is kind of a newfangled, it's still kind of big bandy because he's I would tell him, he has that that education and background that I can say, hey, we're going for kind of a 1930s big band sound in this one. And so he knows, okay, like I know what kind of chords I have to do to get authentic sounds. It's not just like a couple of guys like blowing horns, and like he, marinates in this stuff and comes up with stuff that he feels, might be authentic, but also something that with his approach to me is creating things that I might have sampled. So he'll give me like an A section and a B section and maybe some trills and a solo and that kind of a thing, knowing that that's probably what I'd be looking to lift off of a record if I was sampling.
Man, that's such an advantage to have someone like that. And also makes a lot of sense because like I feel that your stuff has this like cinematic quality to it almost, and it feels so big and real and organic. In a way that a lot of other electro swing doesn't necessarily, and that explains why I didn't know that was the reason, but clearly that is because you've got that ace up your sleeve. So let's move on to your creative process. Like, I don't want to put too much emphasis on the big band stuff because that's still only one part of it, and like you said, it's almost like they're creating samples that you would have used anyway. Obviously you've still got the majority of the creative kind of input and credit. So how does that work in terms of coming up with ideas for songs?
Yeah, a lot of times I will have an idea for the kind of song that I want to write, that I want to create. And maybe I'll hear something, maybe I'll hear an old recording, of something that, I really like. What makes that song cool? What is it about that chord progression or the vibe, or maybe it's a James Bondy kind of a thing, or maybe it's more cinematic, or something where like, let's do something like that. So I usually start out with a pretty good idea of where I'm going with an idea, and then I kind of have to get everyone else on board. Like, this is what we're trying to do. If you came up with something, for the vocal kind of like this, and Elliot, if you came up with some horns that were kind of like that, this thing would really, my vision for what this thing could be would really come together.
So some of your music reminds me of other acts that are not necessarily electro swing. So like The Cog is Dead, Squirrel Nut Zippers, Circus Contraption, this kind of like dark cabaret style sound. I'm keen to know if any of those are influences of yours.
Yeah, for sure. In fact, I've become relatively good friends with Big Bad Voodoo Daddy. I've opened up for them. One of their horn players frequently joins us live. So yeah, even going back to the Stray Cats and even the Kinks, and there's a few things that I remember hearing as a kid. Adamant is a great example. That Goody Two Shoes. Just hearing like these kind of like hearing that great swing era kind of infiltrate pop music and rock. For sure, I heard as a kid and thought, God damn, that's pretty sweet. Like, we should do something with that. There's something about it being from another time and place, from another era, that I think is very sexy about that. But there's also something about, the chord structure, the song structure, just like me pulling apart like what makes this song tick and what makes it cool. Like I love, like the big rolling tones, the dun 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 dun, like those kind of big, you know, that must have been awesome, in the 30s and 40s to hear like the huge horns and like the rolling drums and like, have somebody like Satchmo singing and just like that's always just gonna be cool. So putting a modern twist on the thing, like these are the giants that we're standing on the shoulders of, and if we could just like, just put a little homage to that, that's really what we're trying to do.
Who are some of your influences outside of electro swing, other than the ones that we mentioned a minute ago?
Outside of electro swing, so yeah, let's see. I mean, I listen to everything, and I'm careful to say that I'm not I'm not a genre guy. I don't have aside from the fact that obviously I make electro swing, I don't necessarily gravitate towards genres. I gravitate towards specific like people and artists, and whatever genre they happen to be working in, I'm open to. So I love, the Beatles, the Doors, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, all the classic rock greats because it's great music. And then, in the 80s, I love all the, Depeche Mode and the Cure and the Smiths and kind of that, that dark alternative kind of music. And then in the 90s, I started really getting into more electronic sounding stuff like Underworld and, even somebody like, Richard James, Aphex Twin, kind of weird art math, kind of stuff. So yeah, Peter Gabriel has always been a favorite of mine. The Talking Heads have always been a favorite of mine, mainly just because I think the first time I heard those artists, I realized, oh, music can be like this. Really? Wow. It changes everything. Like you can do whatever you want. And it could still be pop, it could still be rock, it could still be popular. It doesn't have to be, weird music that only weird people listen to. It could be just something different than what you've been hearing your whole life.
So I want to talk about your collaborations because you've done a lot. And we briefly touched on earlier a couple of the people that you've worked with, but one person that you've worked extensively with is Alanna Lyes. So can you tell us how that relationship came about and your experience of working with her, and particularly on her album?
Yeah, I think she was one of the artists that I remember discovering and just realizing like, wow, she's really talented. She would be a good voice. And I honestly forget which song I even reached out to. I believe I reached out to her first and just said, hey, I'm a fan of your stuff. I'm working on this thing. If I sent you a track, would you be interested? And pretty shortly around that same time, she was getting kind of itchy. She was a guest performer on a lot of people's music and working with everybody. And she was kind of like, you know what, I kind of want to be like my own artist. And she sent me a song idea. Oh, I know what it was. She sent me a song idea. I think it was called Disappear. And it kind of had like kind of a James Bondy vibe to it. And like she sent me the piano and the vocal, and I was like, I know exactly what to do with this. And I was thrilled. I was like, oh my God, this is so badass. Like, we could do this one of two ways. This can be an Adam Smith song featuring Alanna Lyes, or we can try to pitch you as an artist and see if Freshly will just get behind you. And I sent it to Nick, and Nick was like, oh, hell yeah, I would definitely release this. This is amazing. And then Alanna wanted to do a whole record. And so she kept sending me stuff, sending me stuff, sending me stuff. And at some point, Riff Kitten got involved. I think I was working on one song and Riff was working on another song with her. And then they're like, well, let's put together a whole album and maybe the three of you can kind of work it out. Riff will do some stuff and then we'll send it to you for the final mix. Something happened like that. I forget exactly how Riff got involved, but the good news is the music we came up with, I absolutely love. Like every time I listen to it, I'm like, oh damn, this is good. This is so good. The bad news is it's all like really self-reflective, smart, trippy, unusual. She has a great ear for like interesting chords and like unexpected melodies. And like that's what I really love about Alanna is that she has a really sophisticated palette, and like when you make something with it, like it's not just gonna be like, well, that's a pretty basic song. It's gonna kind of come together in a unique and unusual way where you're like, I need to hear that again and again. And still, like, that record really underperformed. It was such it was like the most interesting, beautiful thing that Spotify doesn't give a shit about.
You sort of mentioned briefly about Burkey and Miss Emmma as well. But
Yeah.
I just want to talk about them in a bit more detail. So your bio talks about working with a West Coast rapper,
Mhm.
and I'm guessing that's
That's
Burkey, right?
Randy. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So can
That's
you tell
right.
us about him?
Yeah, I mean Burkey, I've known Burkey since the Mutator days. He is well known for a band called, well, he's doing Red Giant right now, but he was in the Vocab Company was his band. And so we kind of introduced them to some of their first big gigs. We brought them to San Francisco for a New Year's Eve show, and Burkey and I just kind of remained friends. And when the Mutator dissolved, and when Buck and I stopped working together, Burkey was like, "Hey man, send me some beats." And I was like, "Absolutely, yeah, that's a great idea." So he was actually, I think, on like the first Adam Smith song.
Yeah,
And
he
like,
features on all your early stuff, doesn't he?
oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and he's like so charismatic, and he's a great dancer, and he's just a great human being. Like he's a great dad. He's like he stays really involved in his kids' lives, but he brings 200% every time. Like if we're doing a video, our last video, Restless, like we filmed that where he works. It's a school, it's a high school. So he's a teacher, and he just like got the keys to the place on a Sunday, and we went in there, and he's doing, he's dancing and stuff in the hallways, and um, he has so much charisma and so much to say. And actually, one of the other things that's really impressive about him, I don't even think he's human. Like I can send him a song or even just a beat, and he'll come up with something in like 15 minutes, like this stream of consciousness. Like he doesn't sit and like work this stuff over. It just comes. I've never seen anything like it.
And then the other one was Miss Emmma with 3 M's.
Yeah.
Emma.
Yeah.
So she's
So-
a burlesque dancer, right?
So she's not actually a burlesque dancer anymore so much, but she's more of an MC, and so she will come out with this. She kind of has a character where she's kind of a seductress, and she tells jokes. She's a very good writer. She's a very good joke writer. She has a great persona on stage for introducing burlesque shows. In fact, there's a burlesque show coming to London that she co-wrote with Dita Von Teese. Like it's got big rooms attached, and she co-wrote it. She was supposed to be the MC. I think that maybe went to somebody else, but she's still very involved in the production. So what I love about her, she's actually kind of the opposite of Burkey in some ways, where she does really mull over the ideas. She loves to take the song idea and go for like a long bike ride or a walk, really think about what she wants to do with it. And so all of her songs are like really legit. They're not like, oh, this is a catchy idea, or I just thought of something funny. They're pretty biographical. Like they're really, in some ways, they can be kind of tragic because that's her reality. Like she writes about her relationships. She writes about, heartbreaks and stuff like that. And it has that, dare I say, like a Nina Simone or like where it's very legit. It's very authentic, and it wasn't created again just to sell records. It's her way of like therapy.
What was your very first experience of electro swing? How did you discover it?
Let's see. So actually, yeah, when I was working, there was kind of a transition between when Mutator went down in flames and before the Gentleman Callers became a thing. Buck, my writing partner at the time, and his wife went to Europe, and somehow or other got exposed to some electro swing parties, and he came back and he was just like, holy shit, dude, we got to do this. Like and it's such a good fit because it's a lot of the same. It's almost like Taco Bell, where it's like all these different products, but they're just the same 7 ingredients, kind of like, now the shell is this way and now it's folded, and like it's the same stuff we were doing in Mutator, except a little bit more focused on it's going to be a little more jazz. It's going to be a little more soul now, but we're still using like a horn section. We're still using live instruments with electronic music. We can kind of just pivot, pretty easily and start making music that would work. I think the current state of the scene would always benefit from, more really high quality producers putting out more of the songs that, it's hard to come up with a hit. It's really hard, I mean, but that's what we need. We need like really strong songs that people are like, holy shit, that song is so badass. And it will create, sort of this suction of like, all right, let's have an electro swing party, because like this, there's so many like good songs that people need to.
What do you think is the future of it?
I mean, I think innovation is the future, and I think what that looks like is like, and again, we're fighting the robots on Spotify because we're not going to see it as an electro swing, but I think pulling in interesting influences of, because there's American swing jazz, you've got your Cab Callaways and all that kind of stuff, but there was great things happening in Brazil. There was you got your Brazilian jazz and all kinds of like interesting influences that could be like, if you're listening to, like, let's say you do go to a night of electro swing and you're going to sit through about 3.5-4 hours of music. Obviously you don't want to hear the same song over and over again. Like, every DJ can't play the same songs, but if it could go, Brazilian for a little while, if it could go, Southwestern for a little while, like just these different influences, I think could make it interesting. Plus, I mean, sound production, music production has gotten so good. I mean, if you listen to like, some deep house or some tech house or some, just like these interesting like synthesizers have just like trying to stay up with like what's happening in the world of online synthesizers, and that's been a challenge as well. And I think there's something between like all this, like wavetable stuff that's happening combined with, these different global, styles. I think there's something in there that could create space for evolution.
And what would you say is like the biggest challenge that you faced in your career?
Biggest challenge, I mean, that could be one of a couple of things. One of them recently is, when creativity, I think, is something that happens when the rest of your life is, allowing it, if that makes any sense. Like, the reason I'm in Thailand right now is because I was kind of losing my marbles in Los Angeles. And I think, there was definitely some, work related stuff and some family related stuff and things like it's kind of the killer of creativity. And I think sometimes life can kind of interrupt what it was you were doing.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self some advice, either sort of 2018 when your first EP came out, or prior to that when you were working with your bands before, what would that one bit of advice be?
Well, I think one of the things I suffer from is, listening to something I did 5 years ago and thinking, man, if I only knew, if I was only better at this, like it sounds so much better, like I think, so probably would have gotten into like music theory earlier. I don't read music. I'm interested in music theory now because I want to know how songs work and about keys and things, especially working with like jazz guys and big band guys. Like they kind of expect you to know a little something about that. So I would have studied more music theory earlier on. I think I thought I was a lot better than I really was. You know, 15 years ago. I wish I had, rather than just trying to figure everything out myself, which was kind of my, like, I was proud of like never reading manuals and, but now we live in this golden age of YouTube videos and stuff where like you can learn a synthesizer inside and out. It wasn't like that when I started, but I guess I'm beating myself up a little bit for not, learning more earlier about how to really produce music, about how to really, program synthesizers, and about like, real like music theory.
If you could collaborate with any artist, dead or alive, who would that be?
Might be Brian Eno or David Byrne of the Talking Heads. Just two people that, from my musical DNA that I kind of grew up. Brian Eno more for his, not because his, I mean, I do like his music, but not specifically because of his music, but more because of how he approaches production and how he approaches the studio. Like that, I've always really, I would love to spend a day in the studio with that guy.
So, what is something outside of music that your fans may not know about you that they would be interested to learn?
Once a year, a group of friends and I will rent motorcycles and explore a country. We did Vietnam 3 years ago, Malaysia 2 years ago, and then this year is Thailand. And this year I decided to stick around after the adventure. But yeah, that is something I really enjoy, is exploring places specifically on motorcycles, because you're there, you smell it, the wind is in your face, and yeah, I do really like that.
And then, final question, anything coming up that you would like to plug or shout out?
There's a partnership that I'm really excited about. I've started working with the Swing Dolls, which is kind of a legacy act here in America. I don't think they're that well known in the Electro Swing community, but they do kind of like a Puppini Sisters thing, a very Andrew Sisters style homage act. They wanted to bring Electro Swing into their act, and I've been expressing frustration of like there's nowhere to play. Well, they're actually really good at doing these performing arts centers and various. So we're going to do a tour in July, going to Texas, Houston, and Dallas, and I'm working on a super secret, super fun song with them. It's a really interesting take on a cover, and I know Freshly doesn't really love covers, but tough, they're gonna get one. Oh, this was bomb. It's so good. And I can't wait to hear what Elliot does. The vocals are done. The track is done. I'm just waiting for Elliot now. And I have a feeling it's going to be a butt kicker.
So, any final words for fans of your music?
There's nothing more satisfying than, than knowing that this is good and they're going to love it, and wait till they get a load of it, and then you release it and they love it. That's really kind of like, I know that there's artists out there. You hear about these, people dying with like a garage full of, masterpiece paintings that they painted because they didn't care if people liked it or not. It was all about just making the painting. For us, I think music is a little bit more social than that, and that's why, not really having a place to play it is kind of a bummer. But knowing that people are enjoying it and hearing from fans and getting, text messages and seeing, the numbers respond, that's why we do it, and we love it. And so thank you, Kap Kun Kap, as we say in Thailand, to the people that are actually listening and supporting the music.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Atom. It's been a real pleasure to chat, and we haven't ever met before, so it's been a genuine experience to get to chat to you and meet you, and I've enjoyed it.
Thanks for thinking of me. Thanks for reaching out. It means a lot. I really appreciate that.
Of course, man. Yeah, thank you. So that was episode 10 of the Electro Swing podcast with Atom Smith. If you haven't already, make sure you check out Atom's music and socials, links in the description. Also, if you haven't followed us yet, please do so at Electro Swing Podcast on all platforms. I'm Offbeat, and I'll be back in another 2 weeks with the next episode of the Electro Swing Podcast. Thanks for tuning in.